Welcome to Weird PVD, the podcast. Every week, your host, Sherry Kasperzak, takes you to the odd corners of beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. From big blue bugs to unique art, from weird history to weird food, you'll never look at Rhode Island's creative capital the same again. Tune in every Weird Wednesday. So, riddle me this, PVD weirdos. Is there a fire-breathing creature protecting buried treasure in the wilds of Rhode Island? Rhode Island folklore is filled with tales of cryptids and other odd creatures, but the legend of the Gloucester Ghoul has endured since 1839, and it's linked to another weird Rhode Island legend, the tale of Captain Kidd's buried treasure. But first, if you're like me, there's something creepy and atmospheric about December. Maybe it's the cold, maybe it's the fact that it's dark by 4:30 in the afternoon. And if you're like me, all you want to do is hibernate with a steamy drink and a scary movie and a creepy book from time to time. It turns out we're not alone, my beautiful weirdos. This gloomy urge to isolate with ghostly tales goes back to pagan traditions. See, the ancient pagans believed that the veil between the living and the dead was the thinnest as the night grew longer and colder. They gathered around fires and told ghost stories as a way to celebrate the cycle of life and death. And the Victorians loved telling ghost stories around the winter solstice as part of their Christmas traditions. The classic A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens was a big part of this tradition. It combines those ghostly pagan traditions with the Christmas spirit. And the tradition continues to this day. I mean, who else is running, not walking, to PVD horror screening of Jack Frost? I'll see you there. And if you have a favorite Christmas-themed horror movie, let me know in the comments. I'm partial to Black Christmas, but let me know what horror movie is a must-watch this holiday season. Are there holiday-themed books or stories that you love? Drop them. It seems like a good time for me to reread Joe Hill's Nosferatu. I'd also like to, in the spirit of giving, call out my amazing t-shirt today. I love my little frog guy, and he says I have to say weird stuff or I'll die. This was a gift from my friend, Mark Azofsky, so thanks, Mark. Just trying to feel grateful for that spirit of giving, so see what I did there. And I offer you today a tale about the Gloucester Ghoul. For the entire month of December, I'm going dark. I'll be sharing tales of Krampus, tales of weird creatures that roam the frostbitten forests of the Ocean State, and your ghost stories. So if you have a weird ghostly tale, I'm saving those for my Christmas Eve episode. You can reach out to me at pvdweirdos@gmail.com, and you can either send a voice recording of your story, or you can let me know if you would like to be interviewed. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's creepy tale. The story of the Gloucester Ghoul starts with the legend of Captain William Kidd. If you don't know, Captain Kidd was a Scottish privateer during the mid to late 1600s. So what's the difference between a privateer and a pirate? Well, let me tell you. A privateer and a pirate do essentially the same thing. They board other ships and take their stuff, and sometimes the ship itself. But a privateer does so legally under a commission of war. See, piracy was super legal if the government sanctioned it, but not so much if you were out boarding ships for your own personal gain. So in the 1860s, accusations of piracy were leveled against Captain Kidd, and like any good pirate, tales of buried treasure followed. Now, rumors of this treasure have cropped up on Oak Island in Nova Scotia, and in Suffolk County, Long Island, Milford, Connecticut, the Thimble Islands in Connecticut, and in Westport, Connecticut. In Rhode Island, there have been rumors of a buried treasure in Jamestown, as well as on Block Island. Back in 1839, a Foster, Rhode Island man named Albert Hicks, who ironically enough was the last person to be executed for piracy in the United States, went on a search for Kidd's buried treasure. Now, Hicks was a super bad guy. He was born and raised in Foster, Rhode Island, but when he was 15, he ran away to Norwich, Connecticut, and began a life of crime that included everything from highway robbery to piracy to murder on the high seas. I will eventually do a deeper dive on Rhode Island's infamous pirate, but his story is wild. But Albert here decided Captain Kidd's treasure was buried somewhere near Gloucester. He'd heard rumors that someone found Spanish doubloons on a nearby farm, and this sparked his desire to get his hands on pirate gold. So he set off one night with three other locals in search of treasure. Once out on the farm, the four men began digging for this alleged treasure, but they were interrupted by this awful creature. Albert described the monster as, quote, a large animal with staring eyes as big as pewter bowls. The eyes looked like balls of fire. When it breathed as it went by, flames came out of his mouth and nostrils, scorching the brush in its path. It was as big as a cow with dark wings on each side like a bat's. It had spiral horns like a ram's, as big around as a stovepipe. Its feet were formed like a duck's and measured a foot and a half across. The body was covered in scales, big as clamshells, which made a rattling noise as the beast moved along. The scales flopped up and down. The thing had lights on its sides, like those shining through a tin lantern. Before I saw it, I felt its presence, and I smelled something that was like burnt wood as it went by. I had a feeling of suffocation when it came near me. The monster seemed to come from nowhere and to go away in the same manner. Now, just how much we can trust the word of a hardened criminal is up for debate. In fact, it's to be noted that there is no mention of this creature in Albert Hicks's biography, The Life, Trial, Confession, and Execution of Albert W. Hicks. However, his sighting is certainly not the only one. The Boston Globe even ran an article in mid January to early February 1896 with the headline, Cow, Monster, or Ghost? Reappearance of the fearsome thing that Pirate Hicks discovered 50 years ago and seemed to be all afire. Here's the article in its entirety, dated January 11th, 1896. Neil Hopkins of Gloucester, Rhode Island, was returning from his work on Dandelion Hill a few nights ago when, at the darkest spot in the road, a strange beast gave him chase. He cannot exactly tell what it was, as he caught only a glance of it as he ran. Hopkins is certain that the creature was some supernatural beast that lives in the Gloucester forest. It seemed to be all afire. It had a hot breath, Hopkins told his neighbors. There was a metallic sound like the clanking of steel against steel. The beast didn't seem to be strong in the wind, for it chased me only a short distance, and then plunged off into the woods. I could hear the dead branches and twigs crackling under the heavy tramp. End quote. Hopkins says it was as big as an elephant, and that he was certain it had no tail. Opinion is divided as to what it was that scared Hopkins. Some think that it was only the escaped circus bear that held up several farmers and scared their horses in the Gloucester woods last fall. That's a story I'm going to have to look up, y'all. That's too good to let go. But I continue with the article. The bear was seen in Buck Woods near Webster, Mass, as far south as Gloucester. Others believe that it was the famous Gloucester monster, that burning beast that Hopkins saw. The burning beast has been seen only once before. That was 57 years ago last summer when it appeared to four Gloucesterites, John Jepp, Ben Cobb, Ben Saunders, and Albert W. Hicks, the pirate who was afterwards hanged on Liberty Island in New York Bay. Hicks was a native of Gloucester, and he and his companions were digging up the Page farm one night, trying to find Captain Kidd's supposed buried gold, when the monster frightened them away. They dropped picks and shovels and run for life. Some Spanish doubloons had been previously found on the Page farm, but the gold diggers never cared to search further after their awful experience. And that's the end of the article. Now, the Gloucester Ghoul has inspired a number of creative endeavors, from literature to t-shirt designs, and Providence's most famous author, H.P. Lovecraft, even reportedly went in search for the ghoul, which is referred to as it, capital I, capital T. Lovecraft reportedly took a trip into the dark swamp of Rhode Island with author C.M. Eddy in search of the creature. This journey was the inspiration for the opening to Lovecraft's Color Out of Space. His trip into the wilderness with Eddie was recapped in a letter to writer Frank Belknap Long. Here's the letter from November 8th, 1923. It was a quest of the grotesque and the terrible, a search for dark swamp in northwestern Rhode Island, of which Eddie had heard sinister whispers among the rustics. They whisper that it is very remote and very strange, and that no one has ever been completely through it, because of the treacherous and unfathomable potholes, and the ancient trees whose thick boles grow so closely together that passage is difficult, and darkness omnipresent, even at noon, and other things of which bobcats, whose half-human howls are heard in the night by peasants near the edge, are the very least. It is a very peculiar place, and no house was ever built within 2 miles of it. The rural swains refer to it with much evasiveness, and not one of them can be induced to guide a traveler through it, although a few intrepid hunters and woodcutters have plied their vocations on its fringes. It lies in a natural bowl surrounded by low ranges of beautiful hills, far from any frequented road, and known to scarce a dozen persons outside the immediate country. Even in Chepachet, the nearest village, there are but two men who have ever heard of it. Eddie discovered its rumor at Chepachet post office one bleak autumn evening, when huntsmen gathered about the fire and told old tales and expressed wonder why all the squirrels and rabbits had left the hills and fled across the plain into Connecticut. One very ancient man with a flintlock said that it had moved in dark swamp and craned its neck out of the abysmal pothole beneath which it had its immortal lair. And he said his grandfather told him that in 1849, when he had been a very little boy, that it had been there when the first settlers came, and that the Indians believed it had always been there. This ancient man with the flintlock was the only one present who had ever heard of Dark Swamp. And that's the end of the letter. So, what exactly is the Gloucester Ghoul? Cryptozoologists and paranormal researchers have puzzled over this question for years. Some believe it's a supernatural entity that protects the aforementioned pirate treasure of Captain Kidd. But could it be an as yet unidentified cryptid akin to something like the Jersey Devil, a creature that people have witnessed but no one has ever captured or studied? According to Hanger One Publishing, some people have even suggested the Gloucester Ghoul is an interdimensional being, a creature that slips in and out of our reality at will. According to this theory, the ghoul may be a visitor from another plane of existence, a realm where the laws of physics and biology operate very differently than our own. So, what do you think? Is the Gloucester Ghoul really roaming the wilderness of Rhode Island? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever seen a creature like the ghoul? And in telling the story of the Gloucester Ghoul, it reminded me of another well known Rhode Island cryptid, Big Rhodey. Now, I did a podcast a while ago on Big Rhodey, the Ocean State's answer to Bigfoot, and you can see the full video and the podcast that I did in my Mercy Brown episode. But I think one of the sightings is compelling enough to share here as well. Now, this comes from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, the BFRO, and yes, that is a real organization. And they received this report from a witness who shared their story from the summer of 1978. And this story was in Charlestown, Rhode Island. I've told very few people this story for fear that they might think I'm crazy. The only reason why I'm taking the time to report this is because of a recent entry a friend of mine who knew about my story told me about. My story takes place in Charlestown, Rhode Island, in the late 1970s. My mother and father and I lived in a wooded area abutting the Indian Cedar Swamp and property owned by United Nuclear, which probably comprises several thousand acres. The property surrounding our home was mixed white Atlantic juniper, swamp, scarlet, red and white oaks, and old growth white pine stands mixed in with a dense understory of briars, mountain laurel, and blueberry brush. We lived off a road with three houses on it. The houses were all built close to the entrance of this development. The road was part of a series of roads that were put in as the start of the development. The roads were oiled gravel and had been left to grow in after years of little or no use. It looked like the developer had started and went belly up. Those roads were great to ride bikes on or take an evening cruise on after bringing my father dinner at his second job. My mother drove a baby blue Mustang Mach 1, and she would drive around the roads with me looking at deer before we retired to our home for the evening. As a kid, I remember this being a highlight to the evening. I was at the time maybe 8 years old, and my mother and I, on this particular night in the late 70s, commenced our ride around the roads to see if we could see any deer. It had been raining earlier with thunder and lightning mixed in. Now it was just raining. We were rounding a corner on one of the roads that paralleled the Indian cedar swamp, and as we started downward, we noticed the road was obstructed by a large blown down oak tree. The tree had green leaves. This makes me think it was the summer or the early fall on it, so it had recently come down. We guessed maybe in the storm earlier, possibly lightning. The road was very narrow, and the brush along the side of the road made it difficult to back the car around to turn around. The rain was falling, but not heavy. The wipers were on, the headlights on the car were on as well. As my mother turned the front end of the car, the lights cast on the left side of the road where the tree had been broken off from its stump. We were maybe 1.5 car lengths from the stump. Beside the tall, fractured stump stood what looked like a large white or yellow white ape. It was maybe 6 to 7 feet tall. Its hair was long, face flat, long, massive arms. Its head appeared to be without any neck. Its chest was broad. My mother and I froze momentarily, 5 seconds, maybe 10, and the figure remained still, staring at us. My mother floored the car into reverse. I remember the terror of it all, the sound of gravel hitting inside the fender wells, the sound of the brush crushing against the car, and then the acceleration as she sped off. We were clear as to what we saw, and we have no question in our mind that we saw something or someone in ape-like shape that night. This we are certain of. We need no one to tell us. What we saw is crystal clear. For years, we told no one. We would talk about it in our home in privacy, and even my father found the story hard to accept. We've never forgotten this, and this story would have never been told if it wasn't for someone else informing me of a similar sighting. I'm now in my 30s, an extremely active hunter, farmer, and woodsman. I hunt deer 40 days a year in Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Jersey. I use automated cameras which are triggered by heat. I've never seen a picture of a Bigfoot on my film. I have seen pictures of deer on my 50-acre tract of land that I would never believe are there if I didn't see it on my film. I know every inch of my land and the surrounding property, and these mystery deer show up at all hours on my cameras, and frequently at that. How can they move right around our hunting parties in such a small area and never be seen? I'll never know. Even today, I find it hard to accept what we definitely saw. I'm not a fan of ghosts, UFOs, or even Bigfoot. I'm not sure to this day what I saw wasn't a man in a costume dressed up out in a rainstorm, a half a mile or more from any home, waiting for my mother and me to drive down the road to give us a scare. The only thing I can say is it was a damn good costume and a damn good plan. We saw what we saw, and this is something I would swear to on any polygraph test, as I'm sure my mother would. Big Rhodey, the Gloucester Ghoul. What other Rhode Island cryptids should I talk about? Let me know in the comments. And if you liked this episode, could you do me a massive favor? Could you give me a follow, a like, drop a comment? You can also follow me over on Instagram. It's a great community over there. I am on Instagram at weird_PVD. I'm on TikTok at weird.pvd. And you can also find me on Facebook. You can share your weird stories on Reddit at r/weirdpvd. If you have a special Christmas Eve ghost story to share, you can reach me at pvdweirdos@gmail.com. Get those stories in, and I'll be sure to read them on my Christmas episode. I can't wait to hear all your spooky tales. And as always, don't forget to keep PVD weird.